Welcome to another deep dive. This time we're going to be talking about altered states of consciousness, something we all experience but I think rarely fully understand. I was really excited to get into this book, From Chocolate to Morphine, by Andrew Weil and Winifred Rosen. So, are you ready to unpack some of the insights about our, relationship with drugs?
Absolutely. I think one of the things that's so fascinating about this book is that it really speaks to anyone who is curious about, consciousness and altered states of consciousness, regardless of, I would say, their own personal experience with drugs.
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
It's written in a very approachable way. I think
Uh,
that's what makes it so engaging.
yeah.
All right, so let's get into it. One of the first things that really jumped out at me was, you know, this assertion that drugs are here to stay. Like,
Mhm.
it's just, every attempt at prohibition has ultimately failed.
Right. And I think it's such an important point. This book really encourages us to shift our focus away from this kind of losing battle with, fighting drugs, and instead start to really understand them and how they affect us.
Makes sense.
And then we can, kind of create a healthier relationship with them.
Absolutely. That actually leads really well into, another key concept that they talk about a lot, which is set and setting, which is really this idea that the context in which you're using any kind of, I guess, substance really plays a huge role in the overall experience that you're going to have.
Right.
And they give some incredible examples of how the same drug can produce very, very different effects based on, both the mindset of the individual who's using it and the environment that they're in. So like I think one example was marijuana, like, in ancient India, it was revered, right, as this kind of spiritual tool,
Yeah.
like used in religious ceremonies.
Hmm.
But then you contrast that to like the 1920s in America, where it was demonized, and linked to crime and, just, negative social deviance.
Right. Yeah, totally different experience. And so the question is, how do we kind of navigate this complex landscape of, altered states and the things that we use?
I think they give us some great tools. One of the first things that they do is they outline these four key indicators of what they consider to be a good relationship with any drug. And I have to say, I think these apply even beyond drugs.
Yeah, they totally do.
But I think it's a really great place to kind of start with this conversation, because we're trying to figure out how to approach these things in a healthy and beneficial way.
So let's unpack these indicators, right? The first one really is, understanding. You have to really understand the nature of what you're using. What are the effects? What are the risks? Both short-term, long-term. That way you can make an informed choice about, what you're doing.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. And the second one, which I think is really interesting, is beneficial effects over time.
Mm.
And I think this one kind of, made me stop and think, because it's not just about, chasing these fleeting highs.
Right.
It's really about, what's the long-term impact that this substance is having on my well-being.
Right. Right. It should, ideally enhance your life and not detract from it.
Yeah.
And then the third one is, the ease of separation. Can you step away from the substance without, feeling that, strong desire to go back?
Yeah. If not, then that's probably a good sign that something's off, right?
Right. It can be a sign of dependence.
Yeah,
Which is one of the things that is, can be problematic about these substances.
for sure. And the fourth one is freedom from adverse consequences. And this applies,
Yeah.
both physically, mentally, right? Like socially.
Hmm.
It's about, making sure that, this substance that you're using is not, having a negative impact on your life.
Right. It's about responsible use.
Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
And I think this leads to a really interesting point they make about the difference between natural drugs and refined drugs, which
Mhm.
I think is a really interesting distinction. They say that, natural drugs in their whole plant form tend to have a lower potential for abuse compared to their more refined counterparts. So like think chewing coca leaves versus using refined cocaine.
Yeah.
It's a completely different experience.
Yeah. Like, the difference between enjoying a cup of, herbal tea or, injecting a caffeine, injection,
Yeah.
like very different intensity.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so let's kind of get into some of these specific drug categories. We'll start with stimulants. So these are the substances that give you that, kind of familiar boost of energy and alertness. We're
Yeah.
talking caffeine, nicotine, cocaine, amphetamines, like all of those fall under this umbrella.
Right. And The way they work is basically they kind of, rev up your nervous system and, that makes you feel more awake, more focused. But of course, there's a
Yeah.
trade-off,
I
right?
was going to say, this sounds kind of too good to be true.
Right,
Right.
right. So while they can enhance, both your, physical performance or mental performance, think students pulling all-nighters,
Exactly.
athletes pushing their limits, it, ultimately comes at a cost.
Okay.
You're depleting your body's energy reserves, and it can lead to, a cycle of dependence.
Yeah.
And also, everybody reacts to these things differently.
Yeah, for sure. I was going to say, I mean, I think some people, experience anxiety or, they get the jitters.
Totally.
Some people have a hard time sleeping. Like, everybody reacts so differently.
Right. Individual sensitivity.
Yeah, exactly.
Speaking of, different reactions, I thought that anecdote about the writer and, her chocolate addiction was so interesting.
It was. It's funny because chocolate, I think, is something that a lot of us see as like a relatively harmless pleasure.
Right.
And yet, she talks about how she had to kind of sneak bites in the middle of the night and like, driving across town just to find that specific chocolate bar.
Yeah.
Like it was a full-blown addiction.
And then, she overcomes it through this program at the Schick Center,
Yeah.
which is fascinating, where she has to savor the chocolate and then spit it out. And, it breaks this craving that she has.
I know.
It was really fascinating.
It really is. It's like, it
Yeah.
really makes you think about, I don't know, the way that we relate to these things that we consider pleasurable and how sometimes those lines can get really blurry.
Yeah.
Now, on the flip side of stimulants, we have depressants.
Right.
Depressants, as the name suggests, they kind of slow down your nervous system. They make you feel more relaxed, drowsy. And I think the most, I guess, obvious example, right, would be alcohol.
Right. Yeah.
Which is interesting because, I feel like a lot of people don't even think of alcohol as a drug.
Yeah.
But, it's, I mean, obviously it has very powerful effects.
Totally.
And I think that, alcohol is one of those substances that really demonstrates that, it's about the dose, right?
Yeah.
Like a glass of wine with dinner might make you feel relaxed and, socially at ease. But then as that blood alcohol concentration rises, then you start to see the impaired coordination, the slurred speech.
Yeah.
When judgment starts to go out the window. Like the consequences obviously can become severe.
Right. Yeah. The dose makes the poison.
Right. Exactly. And actually, they have this this quote from Shakespeare's Macbeth. I thought this was very funny, but also it's like very fitting.
Yeah.
They say that drink provokes the desire, but it takes away the performance.
Right.
Which I think is a very interesting way to put it. But obviously, we can't avoid the issue of alcoholism.
Right.
Which is a serious condition with, many, many far-reaching consequences.
Right. Yeah.
The book also mentions other, depressants like, barbiturates, sleeping pills, tranquilizers.
Yeah.
Obviously those things can be helpful in the short term if you're managing like, anxiety or insomnia.
Mm-hmm.
But long-term use, again, can lead to dependence.
Right.
And mixing them with alcohol is, obviously incredibly dangerous.
Yeah. Really risky.
Okay, so let's move into the category that I think a lot of people find the most fascinating, which is hallucinogens. And hallucinogens really they are mind-altering substances, right?
Yeah.
They can really take you on a journey. They alter perception, they alter consciousness in pretty profound ways.
Right. They're very potent.
Yeah.
And, the set and setting can make all the difference with these.
Exactly. They can open your mind to these, like really interesting new perspectives, but they can also trigger, anxiety or panic.
Yeah.
In some cases, even like psychotic episodes if you're not in a safe environment,
Right.
if you're not with people that you trust.
Right. And the book delves into some specific, examples like LSD, the psilocybin mushrooms, DMT, and, each one of these has their own unique kind of effect and history.
Yeah.
Like LSD. I mean, initially it was actually embraced by psychologists.
Really?
Yeah, as, kind of a way to explore consciousness.
Mhm.
But then, because of its recreational use and then it, eventually being criminalized, it kind of, led to this whole shift in how we perceive it.
Yeah, fascinating. And then you have like DMT, which, is known for these like really, really intense but short-lived psychedelic experiences. A lot of
Hmm.
people describe them as like, mystical or like almost otherworldly.
Right.
I think
Yeah.
there was one anecdote in the book, about a first-time user who had like this really terrifying experience.
Yeah.
And I think that just kind of underscores the importance of, being like really prepared and like, having like really good guidance if you're going to experiment with these things.
Absolutely. And speaking of substances with, a lot of different perspectives, let's talk about marijuana.
Okay.
It's widely used, and has a complex legal status.
Yeah.
And there are, many opinions on its, both benefits and risks.
Right. And I think they do a really good job of like presenting a balanced perspective.
Yeah, they do.
They talk about its therapeutic applications.
Mm.
They even have an anecdote about this multiple sclerosis patient who was able to get relief from muscle tremors by using marijuana.
Right. Yeah. But, it's important to acknowledge, the potential for dependence, especially with frequent use.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Now let's touch upon two more categories really quickly, which are deliriants and dissociatives. So deliriants, like datura, are known for their effects are really unpredictable and can be very dangerous. They cause like, intense delirium, hallucinations, amnesia.
Yeah, extreme caution with those.
Right.
They really recommend that if you are experimenting with these substances to make sure you have a supersitter.
Yeah, for sure. And then you have dissociatives like, PCP and ketamine,
Yeah.
which, they distort perceptions and they can create this like feeling of detachment from reality.
Right. Yeah.
It's interesting because they have like very different reputations.
Right. Yeah.
You know,
Hmm.
PCP is often, associated with negative things
Yeah.
because of how it's portrayed in the media and, and the kind of or communities that it's been used in. Whereas ketamine, has a more like kind of favorable image, partly because of its legal use as an anesthetic.
Right.
And so it's just it's like a reminder that the social context can really heavily influence how we perceive a drug, regardless of its like inherent properties.
Yeah, absolutely. So, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about, these smart drugs or nootropics.
Yeah.
These substances are purported to enhance cognitive function.
I feel like they've gained so much popularity recently.
Have, yeah.
There's a lot of talk about boosting memory, focus. But I thought it was really interesting because they emphasize in the book the need for more research to really confirm, their effectiveness
Mm.
and really their safety.
Yeah. And I mean, it's important to remember that they're not a magic bullet. They might offer some temporary improvements, but they can't replace, hard work and dedication.
Yeah. It's not going to make you a genius overnight.
Right.
So this has been, this has been incredible so far.
Yeah.
We've covered so much ground. I feel like we've gone from this like, historical context of drug use to like, now talking about these very specific effects of, very different substances.
Right.
I'm excited to continue on this journey with you.
Yeah, in the next part of our deep dive, we'll delve into the complexities of addiction. Explore this human desire for altered states, and also discuss alternative pathways to achieving those states without relying on drugs.
I'm really excited about that. I think it's going to be really fascinating. So stay tuned. Wow, so many different types of drugs, and just incredible how the effects and perceptions could be so varied, even for substances we think we know.
Yeah, it's like
Mhm.
our brains are these complex, machines that interact with these chemical compounds in all these different ways. And one thing that really stood out to me was how the book delves into this human tendency towards dependence and addiction. And it's not just limited to drugs, right?
Yeah. They talk about how it's this kind of innate human desire to seek, I guess, a sense of fulfillment, but we're often looking for it, like outside of ourselves.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like this longing for wholeness. And we often end up projecting our power onto external things, whether it's substances, relationships, activities, even material possessions.
We think it's going to make us feel whole, but the satisfaction, is often so fleeting.
Right. And that's where the danger lies, right? Because that fleeting satisfaction, it leaves you wanting more.
Yeah, so the cycle continues.
The cycle continues. And speaking of questioning our habits, I was really intrigued by the concept of chipping that they brought up. Using a highly addictive drug like heroin, occasionally without developing a full-blown addiction. What do you think about that?
I've always been kind of skeptical of that idea. I know, it just seems like playing with fire a little bit,
Mm.
like, is it really possible to have a truly healthy relationship with something that's known to be so incredibly addictive?
It's a tough question, and the book doesn't necessarily provide a definitive answer, but I think it really emphasizes the importance of self-awareness and honesty. Like, are you actually enhancing your life with this substance, or are you just seeking escape? Are you in control, or is it controlling you?
Those are really powerful questions. It's about recognizing that subtle shift from enjoying something to actually needing it.
Yeah. And I think it's even more critical when you start talking about relationships. The book highlights how differing preferences for, drugs and alcohol can sometimes create friction between partners.
Yes, that definitely resonated with me too. There's an anecdote about a couple struggling with this very issue where the wife enjoys a glass of wine after work and the husband prefers to smoke marijuana. And over time, this seemingly small difference created a growing distance between them.
Right, because it can become this wedge, especially if one person's use becomes problematic or starts to, create those feelings of exclusion or resentment.
Absolutely. They also talked about social pressures surrounding drug use, particularly for young people.
Mm.
Peer pressure is a very powerful force, and it can be so hard to resist, especially when you're trying to fit in.
Yeah, and the potential consequences are so real. There's this really poignant story about a young man who knew he was severely allergic to drugs. Like, any substance was basically poison to him.
Oh, wow.
But despite that knowledge, he continued to experiment because of social pressure. It's really tragic.
It's like a reminder that external influences, they can be so strong, especially at that age.
Especially at that age, yeah. They can sometimes override our own instincts for self-preservation.
Right. And the book also, doesn't shy away from the realities of the legal system.
Mm.
Even if you personally believe that a certain drug should be legal, the consequences if you get caught can be really serious.
Right, the laws are the laws. And facing hefty fines, jail time, a permanent criminal record, these are very real possibilities. We have to navigate this landscape responsibly.
Absolutely. And of course, we have to acknowledge the physical and psychological consequences of drug use too.
Mm.
Like anything else, moderation is key.
Right. When we abuse substances, we're abusing ourselves.
Exactly. And they go into detail about the damage, prolonged drug use can inflict on our bodies. Liver and heart issues, respiratory problems, even cancer.
And those risks are amplified when we engage in prolonged and heavy use.
Yeah, it's a scary thought. And it's also crucial to remember how drug use impacts pregnancy and breastfeeding.
Yes, so important. Many substances can actually cross a placenta and potentially harm a developing baby.
And they can be passed through breast milk.
Yeah.
It's just a sobering reminder that our choices, they have ripple effects, and those effects can really extend to future generations.
Absolutely. But, having explored kind of the darker aspects of drug use, I'm really curious to talk about something else the book touches on that I find really hopeful, which is this possibility of achieving altered states of consciousness without relying on drugs.
Yes, I love this part. It's this idea that humans have this fundamental desire to experience these altered states, those moments of transcendence, euphoria, expanded awareness.
Right. We're not just seeking to escape, but we're also seeking to connect with something larger than ourselves, to tap into a different level of consciousness.
And while drugs might offer a shortcut to these states, they're not the only path.
Not the only path at all. For centuries, practices like meditation, yoga, breath work have been used to achieve similar results.
And it's so cool how science is now catching up with these ancient practices, showing how meditation, for instance, can alter brainwave patterns and reduce stress hormones.
Yeah, the benefits are both mental and physical. And it's not just limited to meditation, right? They talk about the transformative power of creative pursuits too. Art, music, dance. When we fully immerse ourselves in these activities, we can experience that sense of flow and transcendence that some people describe feeling on certain drugs.
Like losing yourself in the process.
Exactly, tapping into a different dimension of experience. And they even talk about activities like running marathons as a way to achieve a natural high.
Yeah, I love that. Pushing your physical limits, triggers this release of endorphins and a feeling of accomplishment.
Right, there's that story about a photographer who became addicted to running marathons. What started as a way to achieve that natural high eventually became all-consuming. It's a reminder that even seemingly positive activities can become problematic if they become an obsession.
It's all about balance, right? And
Mhm.
understanding our motivation.
Yeah. Exactly. And, ultimately, the book emphasizes that the potential for experiencing highs is always within us. Drugs might offer a temporary boost, but they come with risks and limitations.
Wow, this has been an incredible journey so far. From the dark side of addiction to the possibilities of achieving those altered states without drugs.
Hmm.
I'm eager to hear your final thoughts on the book's key takeaways. I'm still thinking about that exploration of addiction and, just this whole idea of seeking highs both with and without drugs. I'm curious as we kind of wrap up our deep dive into from chocolate to morphine,
Hmm.
what are some of the most crucial takeaways? Like, what do you think they really want to leave us with?
I think after going through all this material, the core message is about personal empowerment. It's not about saying don't do drugs or, like drugs are the answer, but it's really about giving us, the knowledge to make our own decisions about our relationship with these substances.
It's like they're saying, okay, here's the landscape. Here are the potential, benefits, the risks, the pitfalls. Now go forth and navigate it wisely.
Exactly. And that wise navigation, it requires, understanding, respect, and a good dose of self-awareness, right? Whether we're talking about, a cup of coffee or, alcohol or something, stronger,
Yeah.
a good relationship with any substance is built on those foundations.
Yeah. And I think, one of the things that I really appreciated was their encouragement to explore those alternative pathways to altered states of consciousness.
Yeah.
It's really easy to think that drugs are the only way to get there,
All right.
but they really remind us that those feelings of euphoria, transcendence, connection, like those are all inherently human experiences.
Totally.
And, meditation, yoga, creative expression, pushing our physical limits, like all of those things can help us
Yeah.
get there without the, inherent risks that come with using drugs.
Right. It's like reclaiming your own ability to feel good and to experience those states rather than relying on something external. And I think that's such an important message, especially today when, we're just bombarded with all these quick fixes and instant gratification.
Totally. Yeah.
It's a call to slow down and really tune into ourselves and, rediscover that power that's already within us.
So as we bring this deep dive to a close, what is the one thing that you hope our listener will take away from, this exploration of from chocolate to morphine?
I think the most valuable takeaway is this. The key to having a positive experience with any substance, any activity, it lies in understanding yourself and your motivations. Like ask yourself, why am I seeking this experience?
Mm.
What am I hoping to gain? And by honestly examining those intentions, we can move from, kind of this place of unconscious consumption to this place of mindful engagement, both with the world and with ourselves.
I love that. I think that's such a powerful message. And it really speaks to what this book is all about. It's not just a guide to drugs and consciousness, it's a guide to self-discovery.
Absolutely. It's been a really fascinating journey, exploring this book with you.
And to you, dear listener, we hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity and given you some food for thought. Remember, keep asking questions, keep challenging those assumptions, and keep exploring the world and yourself with, open eyes and an open mind. Until next time, happy exploring.